some cases refuse to disappear. They linger quietly in old files and forgotten evidence rooms, suspended in time, waiting for a single discovery to pull them back into the light. Years pass, witnesses age, cities change, and yet certain stories remain unfinished, like echoes that never quite fade. Tonight we begin with one of those stories. Whether you're returning to the channel or joining for the first time, I'm glad you're here. This episode opens with the case of Sylvia Quayle, a mystery that slept for decades before modern science finally forced it awake. And when the truth surfaced, it carried with it details no one had expected to survive the passage of time. Sylvia Quayle, the eldest daughter of William and Mary Quayle, was born on September 23, 1946, in Cherry Hills Village. By all accounts, she was a bright, warm-hearted child, known for an infectious laugh that could lift the mood of an entire room. Her parents raised her to be deeply compassionate, and from an early age, Sylvia showed a natural instinct to help others. She also developed a fascination with history and architecture, interests she continued to pursue after graduating in 1964, encouraged in part by her uncle, a respected local architect. Sylvia was a woman slightly ahead of her time, ambitious, intelligent, and progressive, yet widely admired within her community. She became one of the first female entrepreneurs in her town, transforming her passion for baking into a successful business. Her wedding cakes were in constant demand, and in certain circles in Colorado, she is still remembered as a source of inspiration for young women pursuing careers against social pressure. But her greatest priority was always her family. She lived only minutes from her parents and younger sister, whom she adored, and it was common for them to begin the day together over coffee. That is why, on August 4, 1981, when Sylvia failed to appear for a planned visit with her parents, alarm set in almost immediately. She had promised to stop by, and breaking such a promise was unlike her. William and Mary tried calling her home, but there was no answer. Without waiting any longer, William walked the short distance. The autopsy revealed that Sylvia had been shot multiple times in the back, likely after an attempt to strangle her. She suffered catastrophic internal injuries that led to fatal blood loss. Bullet fragments were recovered, and additional biological evidence was carefully preserved. At the time, however, forensic science offered few tools beyond basic blood typing and direct comparisons, limiting what investigators could do with the material they collected. Despite nearly 140 pieces of evidence and meticulous documentation, the case stalled. It became a classic, unresolved mystery, not for lack of effort, but because technology had not yet caught up with the needs of the investigation. The first breakthrough came in 1983, when alternative light analysis identified an unknown biological stain on the orange carpet beneath Sylvia's body. The substance was confirmed to be semen, a discovery that provided a critical piece of the puzzle. Even then, investigators could not foresee how important that sample would become. In 1985, a detained offender named Otis Toole claimed responsibility for Sylvia's death, offering descriptions of the area around her home that initially seemed convincing. But doubts soon emerged about his statements and those of his associate, Henry Lee Lucas, who later took credit for numerous unsolved crimes. Independent DNA testing in 1993 excluded Toole entirely. None of the biological samples matched him. In the early 2000s, nearly 2 decades after the killing, advances in forensic science allowed investigators to extract a full DNA profile from the preserved sample. The profile was entered into the FBI's CODIS database, but no matches appeared. Even so, the case remained a priority. Unlike many investigations that fade with time, Sylvia's file continued to receive attention as new technologies emerged, supported both by law enforcement and by her family. In 2019, Metro Denver Crime Stoppers and the genetic genealogy firm United Data Connect joined the effort. Founded by former Denver District Attorney Mitch Morrissey, The company specialized in advanced forensic genealogy. After months of analysis, on May 26, 2020, they identified a suspect. David Duane Anderson, then 61, living a quiet life in Cozad, Nebraska. In 1981, at age 21, he had lived only a few kilometers from Sylvia's home. A review of Anderson's history revealed a pattern of criminal behavior, including multiple burglaries. His former spouse reported that he frequently wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. In one burglary, he had entered a home by removing a window screen, a detail that echoed the method used in Sylvia's case. Investigators needed definitive proof. In January 2021, United Data Connect investigator David Fuller conducted discreet surveillance. After observing Anderson discard trash bags outside his residence, Fuller recovered several items that could carry DNA, including beverage containers. Laboratory testing soon confirmed what investigators had been waiting decades to hear. The DNA matched the profile recovered from Sylvia's home. On February 10, 2021, 40 years after the crime, David Duane Anderson was arrested. Following a difficult trial, a jury found him guilty in March 2022 and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Tragically, Sylvia's parents did not live to see the resolution. William, Jacqueline Lord, and Amy Baker. In the quiet corners of Stafford County, a mystery that had lingered for nearly 4 decades would finally begin to unravel. Jacqueline Lord was 32 years old in 1986, a real estate agent in Stafford County, Virginia, and a devoted mother raising 2 children, a teenage daughter and a young son. Her profession demanded long hours and constant dedication, yet she was known for balancing work and family with remarkable grace. To those around her, she seemed steady, reliable, and deeply committed to both her career and her home. On the morning of November 14, 1986, Jacqueline left for work as she always did, expecting an ordinary day. A client had scheduled an evening meeting at the Harrison office, nothing unusual in her line of work. Property viewings often extended beyond standard business hours. Her children were accustomed to her late returns. Their father was away on a business trip, so that evening they completed their routines on their own and went to bed confident their mother would be home soon. By the next morning, Jacqueline had still not returned. Employees from neighbouring offices noticed signs of a violent disturbance and contacted police. Inside Jacqueline's office, investigators found blood on the walls and floor. Her black shoes, business cards, and property documents were scattered across the room, stained with blood. The following day, the family's fears were confirmed. Jacqueline's partially unclothed body was discovered in a neighbouring county, beneath a pile of discarded carpets. Evidence indicated she had been assaulted, and the fatal injury came from a heavy blow to the head. The scene offered few immediate answers. Co-workers had last seen Jacqueline around 9 p.m. on the night she disappeared. Investigators concluded that the struggle had taken place inside the office. With surveillance technology still rare in the 1980s, detectives relied heavily on witness testimony. As in many cases, those closest to the victim were examined first. Suspicion briefly fell on Jacqueline's husband, an officer assigned to a narcotics unit, but travel records confirmed he was out of town at the time. Detectives traced phone calls, financial activity, and professional correspondence, searching for any clue. Jacqueline's light-coloured Nissan Sentra was found a month later in Fairfax County, reinforcing the belief that she had been forcibly transported after the attack. Investigators suspected the assailant may have planned the encounter, but lost control and fled in haste. Despite persistent efforts, the case soon reached a dead end. For decades, new teams revisited the investigation, re-interviewing witnesses and re-examining evidence as forensic science advanced. DNA samples were repeatedly tested and entered into national databases, but no matches appeared. Appeals to the public generated tips, yet none led to a definitive suspect. Years passed, and the case moved from one sheriff's administration to the next without resolution. That changed in 2017, when a newly formed cold case unit in Stafford learned of emerging genetic genealogy techniques. The Parabon Laboratory, known for building detailed DNA-based profiles, created an updated portrait of the unknown suspect, estimating ancestry and physical traits. Even so, traditional databases remained silent. Investigators concluded that the person responsible had likely avoided serious encounters with law enforcement since the 1990s. Attention then turned to open genealogy databases, public platforms where individuals voluntarily upload genetic data to trace distant relatives. Through this approach, detectives were able to reconstruct extended family connections. In 2023, they identified a suspect, 65-year-old Elroy Harrison, a man with no prior major criminal record. To confirm the link, investigators needed a fresh biological sample for direct comparison. 2 months later, the case expanded in an unexpected direction. In 1989, 3 years after Jacqueline Lord's death, 18-year-old Amy Baker was visiting relatives in Falls Church, Fairfax County. On March 29th, she vanished while returning home to Stafford. Her light blue Volkswagen Beetle was found abandoned along a roadside leading to Interstate 95, locked, with the fuel tank nearly empty and hazard lights still flashing. Believing the vehicle had simply been left behind, authorities towed it away. 2 days later, Amy's family searched the surrounding area themselves and discovered her body near the same highway exit in Springfield. Investigators concluded that Amy had likely left her car in search of a nearby gas station when she encountered her attacker. As in Jacqueline's case, forensic specialists preserved biological evidence that would wait decades for analysis. In 2023, when Elroy Harrison's DNA was entered into national databases as part of the Jacqueline Lord investigation, detectives in Fairfax County received an alert. The same profile was connected to Amy Baker's case. The two long-separated investigations had converged on a single name. On March 4, 2024, a Stafford County grand jury indicted Elroy Harrison on multiple charges, including first-degree murder. Authorities in both counties are now working together to bring the case to its final conclusion. Jody Loomis was born on June 5, 1952, in Salt Lake City, Utah. At school, she was known as kind and open-hearted, the sort of girl who made friends easily and seemed instinctively ready to help. She threw herself into school events and sports with what people described as endless energy. From an early age, Jody had a special love for animals, especially horses. Her parents noticed how serious that passion was and supported it whenever they could, taking her to local farms and stables and eventually enrolling her in riding lessons. Jody learned quickly. Riding became more than a hobby. It became the center of her world. As she grew older, she began competing, and she often did well. Most of her free time was spent at the stables, in that familiar rhythm of early mornings, tack rooms, and the steady comfort of routine. But on August 23, 1972, her day looked different. She had urgent plans and decided to take her bicycle instead. She never made it to her destination. By late afternoon, naturally, suspicion initially touched those closest to her. Jodi's fiancé, Jim, was questioned early, but he was quickly cleared. He had been working at the very hospital where Jodi was brought in. Police also looked closely at two men who had been cutting wood nearby around the same time, but no solid connection could be established. The case stalled. 2 years later, a new tip offered a flicker of hope. An anonymous source claimed members of a local biker group had bragged about attacking a woman and then shooting her with a .22 caliber firearm, the same caliber believed to have been used in Jodi's case. The FBI was brought in for ballistic testing, but the result was disappointing. The weapons linked to those individuals did not match the evidence. Meanwhile, fear spread through the community. Women began to feel unsafe not only outside, but even in their own homes. The anxiety intensified in 1975, when the United States was gripped by news of Ted Bundy, who targeted young women across multiple states. Utah investigators considered whether Bundy could be connected to Jodi's case. The timeline, Jodi's age, and certain broad patterns made it a question they had to examine. But ultimately, investigators concluded that Jodi was not among Bundy's known victims. And so Jodi Loomis's case drifted into the long, quiet shelf life of cold files. 36 years later, in 2008, a newly formed cold case unit decided to reopen the investigation, hoping modern methods could succeed where the past had failed. Instead, they met a crushing setback. Over the decades, key evidence had disappeared from storage. Crucial items like clothing, a bullet, and the biological samples that might have provided clear answers. Then, unexpectedly, the case spoke again. One item had survived: Jodi's left shoe. On it, forensic analysts found a preserved biological trace. A laboratory was able to build a DNA profile from that sample and upload it into CODIS, the national DNA database. But there were no matches. It suggested the attacker had never been entered into the system for a serious offense in the decades since. Detectives tried everything they could within the old boundaries, retesting early suspects, including Jodi's fiancé, and asking the community to provide samples voluntarily. The workload was enormous, and still, the results stayed the same. So investigators tried something different. They produced a custom deck of standard playing cards, each featuring a photo and short summary of an unsolved case in Utah. The cards were distributed in local prisons, based on a simple bet. People talk, and sometimes the truth circulates where investigators can't reach. Even that strategy brought no break. Jodi's case might have remained unresolved if not for a breakthrough elsewhere in 2018. Using genetic genealogy, the technique that helped identify the notorious Golden State Killer, investigators showed how even a distant relative, unknowingly uploading their DNA to a public database, could create a trail back to a perpetrator. For detectives working Jodi's case, it wasn't just promising. It felt like the last real door still left to try. They found a distant familial link to the unknown DNA profile and began building a family tree, filtering people down by age, sex, and geography. Eventually, the search narrowed to a family living within about half an hour of the location where Jodi was found. The parents had 6 sons, but one stood out: Terrence Miller, a retired heavy equipment operator. Detectives were alarmed by his criminal history, which included serious allegations of violence. That history pushed him to the top of their list. In a carefully planned operation, investigators obtained a discarded item he had left behind, enough to collect a fresh DNA sample. When the lab compared it to the 1972 evidence, the result was unequivocal: a full match. In April 2019, 78-year-old Terence Miller was arrested in connection with the attack and the killing of Jody Loomis. Court proceedings began toward the end of 2020, but before the case could be completed, Miller died. Even so, investigators continued the process they had fought for over decades. A jury ultimately returned a guilty verdict on the most serious charge, and although legal arguments followed, the verdict remained in place. For the detectives who carried the case across nearly half a century, it was more than paperwork. It was a statement, not a threat, not a slogan, but a hard-earned truth. Time can hide a crime, but it cannot erase it forever. Saanich, British Columbia, 1987. Jay Cook was 20. Tanya Van Kuylenberg was 18. They'd met in high school, the kind of couple people remembered because they looked like they were building something careful and real. In November, they celebrated a small milestone, nothing grand, just that quiet, private happiness of two young people who believe time is on their side. Tanya was saving for a long-dreamed trip to the Netherlands, where her father's family lived. Jay was working hard too, shifts at a pizza place, extra work on a fishing boat, doing what you do when you're young and determined, and the future still feels negotiable. Then Jay's father offered them an errand that sounded almost like a mini-adventure. Drive down to Seattle to pick up expensive furnace parts. A useful favour, and a chance to see the road together. So, on the evening of November 18th, 1987, they climbed into a bronze 1977 Ford Clubwagon van, his father's vehicle, and started south. They moved through familiar Canadian landscapes and toward the long spine of Highway 101 along the American coast, travelling by ferry in stages, Victoria to Port Angeles, then onward toward Bremerton and Seattle, a route that should have brought them home the very next day. But November 19th came and went, and they didn't return. At first, it was that specific kind of worry families recognise instantly. Not panic yet, but the sense that something has broken the pattern. When Jay's father realised his son never even arrived to collect the parts, the concern sharpened into dread. Police listed them as missing, and the search began. 5 days later, on November 24th, Tanya was found in a ditch beside a rural road near Alger, in Skagit County, Washington. The evidence told investigators she had been restrained, assaulted, and shot. With Jay still missing, suspicion briefly swung in the wrong direction. An understandable, tragic reflex when only one person has been found, and the other is still a question mark. That question was answered on Thanksgiving Day, November 26th. Nearly 100 kilometers away, a hunter walking his dog discovered Jay. He had been badly beaten and killed in a brutal, humiliating way, his body wrapped in a blue blanket that didn't belong to either victim, a detail that felt like a signature and a taunt at the same time. Soon after, Tanya's wallet and keys turned up near the Greyhound station in Bellingham. Not far from there, the bronze van was found abandoned. Inside were cable ties matching those used on Tanya, receipts and ferry tickets that confirmed their path, and scattered clues, gloves, stains, fragments of a story that refused to assemble into a face. On Tanya's pants, investigators collected biological evidence that would become the case's most stubborn promise. Not then, but someday. In 1987, DNA was only beginning to enter real-world investigations, and national databases were nothing like what they are now. Still, the team did something that would matter decades later. They preserved what they could, carefully, methodically, as if they were sealing time in an envelope. The years dragged on. There were cruel letters sent to the families, anonymous, descriptive, claiming responsibility, postmarked from far-flung cities, as if whoever wrote them wanted the grief to travel too. Police eventually identified the postcard writer years later, but did not link him to the killings. Meanwhile, the true offender remained out of reach, either never arrested for something that required DNA collection, or simply never on the radar at all. Then, in 2018, the case turned a corner. Investigators used genetic genealogy, the same broad idea that had recently helped identify other long-unknown offenders, and followed distant family connections hidden inside public genealogy data. Two relatives had unknowingly opened a door. A cousin here, a cousin there, and suddenly a family tree began to take shape. Detectives narrowed it down to one man who fit the profile and the timeline: William Earl Talbot, Jr., living in SeaTac, Washington. To confirm it, they needed a direct comparison. So they watched, waited, and collected a discarded coffee cup, testing what was left behind. The DNA matched the preserved evidence. On May 17, 2018, Talbot was arrested. In 2019, a jury found him guilty, and he received life sentences. The case was widely described as a landmark, one of the first convictions driven by genetic genealogy presented in open court, where the method itself could be challenged and defended under scrutiny. But the story didn't end cleanly. In December 2021, an appeals court overturned the convictions, citing concerns about juror bias, specifically whether a juror who expressed hesitation about staying fully impartial should have remained on the panel. For the families, it was like being pulled back to the beginning after finally reaching the last page. Then, on December 22, 2022, the Washington State Supreme Court reinstated the guilty verdicts, rejecting the appeal and restoring the convictions. After more than 30 years, and after a detour through the legal system that threatened to unravel everything, the outcome returned to the same hard conclusion. The DNA did not lie, and the timeline finally held. And yet, even with a verdict restored, you can feel the cost in what was lost along the way. Tanya's parents died before they could see the full resolution. Jay's family carried the weight through every hearing, every headline, every reversal, holding on to the hope that the evidence preserved in 1987 would one day speak loudly enough to be heard. It did. It just took decades to find the moment, and the technology, that could translate it. Some stories do not end when the headlines fade. They linger in quiet rooms, in unopened files, in the long shadows cast by unanswered questions. For years they wait, patient and silent, until one day a single thread is pulled and the whole dark tapestry begins to unravel. If something about this story unsettled you, stay with me. Subscribe, because in the next chapter we step deeper into the places where forgotten truths are still breathing, waiting to be found.